I wanted a relationship with my dad, I needed to create the relationship with my dad. I want to talk about love, trust, and avoidance. I think it's important. When avoidance creeps into our relationships, it's like a freezing rain, blowing through, killing your relationship and trust. So how do we reignite the flame and melt away the ice of these avoidance pieces that we have in our life that we're both doing? And I think this brings on some discussion points of how powerful holding on to the avoidance things can negatively impact the trust, the communication together. When you don't have the lack of openness, the trust is broken, the conflict escalates, you have emotional distance, and now your problem solving is a little bit reduced because you're not diving into the thing that you're avoiding. And that impacts your personal relationship. And also, and if you have hey, we have a fantastic relationship, but like my work relationship, it even goes into that, which we're going to talk about. But I want to stick to like personal relationship right now, because avoidance in the personal relationship, this is what happens. It impacts the trust together. And that's really damaging. And it's very essential for your relationship to cycle around trust and promote open communication.
We all live in either our comfort zone or our uncomfort zone, right? And avoidance is a lot like looking in the mirror. You feel that it's uncomfortable, internally, because you're not handling the thing. But you have to recognize that looking in the mirror, it's actually your comfort zone, right? Because if it's a habit that you do over and over again, it's where you're comfortable. And so taking the action, the uncomfortable action, is what actually moves you forward in life. And your perception is that it's going to be uncomfortable. But if you really have strong buy-in to your commitment to the future, your, compelling future, that's where comfort zone is, right? Your comfort zone needs to become the uncomfortable actions that you need to take time and time again to be successful, to be happy, to flourish, to have an incredible relationship, to have wealth, all of those things. Take uncomfortable actions a lot of times because you don't know the next step or the right step or the best step. And so you don't do anything at all. And I think that's sort of part of the impact on trust and communication in the relationship, because ultimately you don't get what you want and what you believe you should have. And if you're feeling that, your partner's feeling it 10x. Uh-oh. Did I just say that out loud?
10x? This is absolutely true. And I want to share a story of a relationship that I healed that I was avoiding. And it was with my dad. And that relationship, we didn't communicate for, I don't know how many years. It was maybe 5 or 6 or more years that we didn't communicate. I was really frustrated with him. I was mad about his decisions. And he was in a lifestyle that he didn't have time or could create time to call me. So like it was always on me to call, to create like the conversation. And we had just been through things in our earlier days together before he had got remarried, that it wasn't resentment. It was more like I just missed our relationship as father-daughter. So like all these years I like held on to this, like, oh, I'm so frustrated with you. But I avoided the conversation. I remember a letter that he had sent to me that wasn't very kind, and he probably didn't write it in a good space and forgot about it. And I remembered that, and I had shared it with an agency that I was working with at the time. And they're like, oh my gosh, he's a terrible person. But as the years went on, I realized that I was avoiding this relationship. And I also realized if I wanted a relationship with my dad, I needed to create the relationship with my dad. It wasn't just like, hey, I'm going to wait around, hopefully that it comes. I really had to create the relationship. So I took tiny steps to start the process, and they were really uncomfortable. So one of my tiny steps was I actually flew to his house and said, I'm booking like 2 nights at your house. Can I stay with you? And then like start little micro conversations. And then like the next time I would fly out and see him in California. And it was the same thing. Like, hey, can I stay 3 nights? Can I stay 4 nights? Well, those micro conversations turned into the now like events. Dad loves hiking. So I'm like, my dad loves hiking. Let's go for a hike. And his wife doesn't love hiking. So this gave us a chance to actually start a bonding. And we did this several times throughout, the next 2, 3, 4 years. And what it did is it started creating open communication. I started moving through the avoiding conversation that I had avoided in little steps. It was frustrating because I was still frustrated at the very beginning in those micro conversations. I was like, a relationship just isn't where I want it to be. But I kept trying and I never gave up because I was like, I've got one dad. I've got to see if I can make it work. I'm just going to create a new relationship with them in this adult space. And now we have an incredible relationship. We're besties. We're best friends. We talk all the time, but it was because I put the time and energy into it to move through the avoidance piece that I had been avoiding. I'd moved through the emotional distance. I had moved through the problem, the trust, the judgment. I was like, I need to create something new. And he also wanted that. And that was cool because you can also put all the effort in and the other person doesn't want it, but he also wanted it. And it was teaching him that I actually did care about him. And I was teaching me that he actually did care about me. And his style was that he just doesn't call you a lot. So you have to be the one to call. So I get that now. Whereas my mom calls me every other day. So it was like, this is great. Now I know how he works as an adult. And now I know how I can meet him where he's at.
Yeah. Great story. I got to live through almost all of it.
Yeah.
As things progressed with your relationship with dad, and we love him. But you said something in there that really caught my ear. And it was at the very beginning of your story. And that was, you received a letter from him and you showed it to someone else. And their immediate feedback was avoidance, right? Like, hey, he sucks, avoid him. And I can tell you that that is going to be the feedback you'll almost always get to challenging situations when you share it with the people around you, because it's that avoidance thing that they want you to avoid conflict, right? Because they're all of a sudden living in their own story and imagining what it might be like. And I've seen so many great things go up in smoke because people have sought the advice of someone who didn't really matter in whatever the conflict was, whatever the situation was. And for some reason, their opinion of avoidance had way more weight than your own internal intuition, your trust, and your mission, right? Like your mission was to create a relationship with your dad, but asking a few of the wrong people, or sharing it with them can completely change your mind. So,
and I never thought about it like that, David, because, I didn't want to share that letter with my mother because I already knew what her opinion would be. And so the closest person I had at the time was a talent agency that I was with. So I showed my agent and they looked at it like, yep, he's a terrible person. Yeah, you should definitely stay away from this person. So yeah, that I'm sure that affected me now that I think of it, to build up my mind. Yep, he's a terrible person. I'm just going to avoid him.
And so I'm going to derail completely, right? And my history, I have a long history of sales. And there used to be this situation where I would be engaged with a sales interview with someone who was coming along nicely to, participate in what I was doing. And then someone would show up out of the blue, right? They'd walk in to their business because I was selling B2B. And I called them the walk-on, right? And the walk-on's opinion was predictable because it was always avoidance. It was always, you don't need to make a decision today. You don't need to spend the money. Hey, remember, you've got to make, this ABC. I mean, whatever it is, they had no insight on what was actually going on. So I very quickly learned to, engage the walk-on and either deflect them or get them happily involved with a side project. So sorry for the derailment there, but let's continue back to the discussion points here.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I like that story.
So I'll try and reel it back in after you're like, what is he talking about? And so we started the conversation talking about avoidance, and I suggested that procrastination, poor time management, and perfectionism were all sort of in the same vein. Do you recognize any of that statement in yourself? Because I know exactly where I fit in that equation.
I don't. I think that they're tied together. I think time management comes down to when are you going to tackle the thing? You'd said commitment. to do the thing, you have to make the commitment to do the thing. Yeah, of course. So it's like, yeah, time and commitment,
I think we need to schedule a conversation.
Yeah. And then you're like,
I do recognize myself in that as poor time management, right?
Mm.
And we've worked with a lot of people to help structure our time management. The thing that allowed me to get the paperwork out of the closet was that I put it on my calendar, but it also comes down to commitment, right? And I have an interesting definition of commitment, and that is, doing the thing you said you would do long after the mood you set it in has left you, right? That's my version of commitment. And that's really when it comes down to the successful people that we work with, that we talk to, that are mentoring us, that are coaching us. Successful people do what unsuccessful people aren't willing to do, right? They take those uncomfortable actions. So that's the way I wanted to wrap that up.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool. Yeah. And I want to move into how you can take the step to start the open communication and trust cycle, because that's important in your personal relationship. And number one, it ties back into what David just said, was initiate the conversation, but you can't initiate it unless it's on your schedule. So you've got to schedule it in, like, hey, we're going to have this conversation about this thing,
10X conversation that is coming. We also have something that we personally call PST, right?
Yes. We call it personal share time. We do call, personal share time with a topic. but to begin the open communication and trust, number one, David's right. You have to schedule it in. And then both people know mentally, emotionally, that you're going to have a conversation about the thing. And then you initiate the conversation with kindness, openness, love, non-judgmental. By the way, something that really helps to build yourself up to have that uncomfortable conversation is getting support from a friend or a community or a coach to encourage your mission. There are a lot of things that David and I've gone through. And I remember, David, a client that we had to tackle, and we actually called one of our coaches to say, can you help us walk us through this conversation that we're going to have that's really uncomfortable? And I think we were letting them go. And, but we end up calling our coach to get some good support to help us believe in our mission to do the thing. And then as well as speak honestly, you have to be really deep down honest about where you're at with the thing, even if you're afraid to talk about it, no matter what, because it is uncomfortable, but your partner doesn't know deep down where you're at with it. So you have to be like, really dig deep and be honest about the thing you're going to have the conversation about.
In that uncomfortable conversation, when we reached out to our coach, the first thing they asked was, what is your preferred outcome, right? Like, what would you want the outcome to be? And so, that's a little different than just asking your neighbor, what should I do, right? Because then they just give you their opinion. But the other thing about having, a good strategy for open communication and trust in that thing that you're trying to avoid, and you're going to feel like I'm buttering you up here, Wendy. But for me, I really don't like to ambush people, right? And so if I need to have an uncomfortable conversation about a topic, especially with an employee or a partner or a client, I'll let them know right up front the agenda of the conversation, so that they can process their defenses, and not in real time, right? Like, because I truly want most of the time to hear people's feedback as well as being heard, right? There's two sides to every story. So I like that. Don't ambush people.